Good morning. This is Brad Elrod, and I'm here with Ed Kinkler. We're members of the Rx-360 Cargo Theft and High Risk Work Group. We work with members across the industry. One of the things that we have done recently is we designed a white paper all over the topic of what it really costs to lose pharmaceuticals to cargo theft. And so we're going to spend a little time talking to you today about it. Just as an introduction, I have been at Pfizer for about 12 years. I've worked in supply chain security programs since as far back as the events of 9/11. And it's been an interesting process for us to put together this paper and take into account the experts that we had involved. We had a total of 5 people on the team developing this paper. And I'll let Ed introduce himself right now.
Hi, my name's Ed Kinkler. I'm Supply Chain Integrity Manager for Teva Pharmaceuticals. I've spent the last 15 years working in both the pharmaceutical and the precious metal industry in the corporate security side of things. 8 of those years specializing in pharmaceutical cargo security.
Okay, next slide, please. We started out, just to give you some boundaries around what we were doing. The problem statement that we came up with was that, too often busy professionals like ourselves, or those of you who may be listening, you don't have time really to research the true cost of a security failure. In many cases, the real costs aren't even known or considered. A poor understanding of security return on investment leads to a view that security is simply a cost with limited positive contribution to the company's net results.
So basically the purpose of this is we developed a tool for the pharma industry, their security professionals, to basically estimate the real cost of the loss in cargo thefts. Sometimes, people take the value of the cargo that's lost and say, that's it, there's our loss, and they're done with it, which that's not the case. So the intent of this is to generate thought and areas for companies to consider as to each company's situation.
Okay, next slide, please. And again, the team of people, in addition to myself and Ed, that worked on this paper were Susan Griggs of Eli Lilly and Tom Sumner of Amgen, along with Dr. Marv Shepard, formerly of the University of Texas, but still actively involved in a lot of the academic approach to cargo loss and theft prevention. Next slide, please. When we talk about replacement costs, we wanted to talk about a broader sense of things than just the cost of the material that was lost, because people seem to underestimate what all goes into an event when you have a loss. So, obviously the first thing you have to consider is the acquisition of critical product components, and they may be delayed, or it may cost you more to replace them just because there's a short time frame in which you have to do it. So you have the physical cost, and that's really what this is talking to. It's if and all the things that have to go into that. The next thing was a loss of net production output, because now you have to replace something you've already made, and you actually end up making product sort of like against yourself, because you don't know what's going to happen to that product. Plants are forced to use a precious amount of production capacity. And they just don't have the time always to back up and do that. Some of these plants are already working at capacity or beyond. So this has an overall impact to your profit as well, and it will likely affect your production teams and schedules for other products, not just the product that was stolen.
We all know,
if you could click the slide a couple times, please.
Along those lines, that what overtime pay is, in some of the environments where the salaries are pretty high to begin with. Then you have to outsource. So, a lot of our products are outsourced, so the manufacturing process there, is required. And if you're surprising someone, a vendor or a supplier, they're gonna elevate the cost on you also. These manufacturing complications are dependent on the specific production process, which could be difficult. Now, going back, let me digress a little bit on the acquisition of the critical product. A lot of companies do have safety stock in the warehouse, places like that, depending on their business continuity plans. Well, that's all well and good, but the pharma industry is a little bit unique, and you may very well, before you go to use that safety stock, make sure that the regulatory authorities have not told you to recall the entire lot number, because you may be going back to the warehouse and replenishing with the same lot number, which could be subject to recall. We'll get into that a little bit more further down the road. So just keep that in mind.
All right, next slide, and just advance through all 5 of the bullets if you want. As you saw, we talked about replacement costs, but one of the other obvious costs is transportation costs. And the way we did this entire paper was we broke down sort of by area, and hopefully what we're doing here today is explaining to you what the thought processes were in this. Do recognize that, what a transportation cost for one company may be very different than that for another, but the idea is the same, and that is the intent, is to make you think about the different things that you would want to consider. So, beyond the obvious cost of having to replace and ship the replacement material, you're also going to want to think about, possibly changing your logistics provider or transportation provider due to a loss of confidence in that initial shipping company.
Well, and going to that, your legal department or your risk management department may already turn around and tell you not to use that logistics provider. The problem with some companies is you have all of your eggs in one basket. You're using that same one for a bulk of your shipments. Now all of a sudden you're told by the risk managers or your insurer not to use that company. What do you do? So now you have to turn around and scramble in order to get coverage.
Right, and that may force you into the next bullet here, where you have to look at an express delivery provider. You may be looking to have to make a quick delivery because now you're at a short order situation or something.
The cost of buying an airplane for a cross-country trip, it's huge.
And then the other, the thing that you may have to change the mode of transportation, as Ed was alluding to. You may have been, trucking at one point, and now you have to fly it, or you may have been shipping it by ocean, and because you now have to replace it in short order, you're going to have to fly the next shipment. So all things to consider. You may want to look at changing the route even to reduce the risk. If your theft happened in an area that you now have intel on that is showing you that there's a higher risk than you had previously thought, you may have to reroute. That it too could increase your cost of transportation.
There are normal security costs that you've already had in place, or we hope you had in place. The cost of shipping pharmaceutical products, the additional cost of completing the investigation, and implementing recommended improvements could be considered at this time. You're going to find that this is going to be expensive, but nonetheless, this is money well spent when you do your due diligence and you implement the security processes.
Okay, next slide, please. The next thing that we consider was, what are your regulatory obligations? And we've talked about this, sort of alluded to it anyway, but regulatory agencies, in the case in the U.S., the FDA most likely, has instituted new reporting requirements in the event of a theft. So you've got to think about how much time and effort and everyone knows that time is money. So if the time you have to put into doing a theft report, investigation, all that has to go into this as well.
And just remember too, the recall process. Always keep that in the back of your mind, what that's going to cost if that's the case. And the regulatory agency may make you recall the product.
Yeah, it very much so, depending upon the impact to the patient. And that's really, at the end of the day, that's what they're looking. The FDA or the regulatory agencies are looking at is, what is the risk to the patient. So that has to be considered. That cost is going to be very dependent upon your individual firm's policies and programs, how you go about doing that investigation, who all you have involved, to use an outside investigator or an internal investigator, travel costs and whatnot.
Go ahead.
The circle that you want to look at for involvement will also expand internally and externally based upon a lot of things. What is the amount of the material that was stolen? You know, somebody stealing a box of material off the back of a truck is one thing. Somebody stealing an entire truckload of material could be another, depending on the product and the amount that was taken. And that could be almost an entire lot, and that forces them to look at it differently. What's the type of material? Is it a controlled substance? Is it a vaccine? Is it an injectable? You know, those types of things all put to, you know, in the storage requirements. All of those things sort of play together to make you look at each type of product differently. You know, think of it, if somebody stole a bottle of aspirin, and as long as it's intact and the seal hasn't been broken, it's probably still okay and no one's likely going to get hurt. But if it was a diabetic medicine, an injectable diabetic medicine, and it's not stored at temperature, it could lose its efficacy, and now you're essentially doing no good for the person who's depending upon those drugs.
And on top of that, your label, your company's label is on that bottle. Somebody gets sick, somebody dies, you're looking at litigation costs down the road per incident.
Right. So then you also have to look at, you know, storage requirements, geographical location. You may not have all your resources at the right place, depending on where this gets stolen at. And then, you know, we already mentioned the health risk associated with the stolen product. What happens with it? And as Ed so astutely said, there's no, the criminals don't put their name on it when they steal this. So the only name they've got to come back to is the one on the box.
Okay. Of course, your internal resource costs, they might be calculated by, you know, just multiplying the estimated employee time per event by the average company hourly wage.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and this, you know, we've sort of already alluded to this, but these are the things that the FDA wants to consider before making a call on a recall or quarantines, or what do you do with a recovered product. But, you know, they're going to be looking for a lot of information. Basically, as we already alluded to, the impacted product lot size. You know, small lots are more affected by a theft than large lots. You know, if you have a mass-produced product, it's a much smaller percentage, and it's generally a lot less of a risk to people. Quantity of related lots currently in the legitimate distribution system. What are you thinking? You know, how percentage-wise, how much is actually out there and has already been distributed? What do you already have on your shelf? So the agency can do a recall or a quarantine, and then they can also give you termination requirements. What did you do to dispose of the material, things like that.
And just remember that same lot number, once again, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but I can't emphasize it enough. The same lot number may be a good portion of your safety stock for that product.
And then there's even if the product is recovered by law enforcement at some point, you're going to have some additional costs there, because the law enforcement guys aren't going to pay to dispose of it. They're going to want you to come get it. So you got to pay to move that material and whatever time it was held in a holding facility. Then you got to worry about the secure handling of a return product that you're not even sure you can still use, and the transportation of the product that was already stolen. So you're literally not just paying for transportation a second time. You've already done that. You've already paid for this transportation twice. You now be paying for it a third time just to recover that product.
Yeah, and you're also paying for storage of that product, however long it takes for somebody to get to that area and get that product out of whatever warehouse it may be, wherever it's quarantined. And, you know, any other contracted service by a third-party redistribution vendor that you're going to use.
And so the costs keep going. Next slide, please. Okay, and you know, Ed put together a lot of this information, but you know, you got to look and think about what your investigational costs are. And as an example, this is just an example at very high level, rounded off cost, but it gives you an idea how fast this can add up for even a very simple product. Ed, why don't you talk them through this?
Well, you know, it's number one, you're looking at a full truckload theft, and let's look at this based on some experiences that I've talked to people in the supply chain security field. Using, the cost for an investigator, time, travel, and them liaising with law enforcement. And remember what Brad had said, these are just estimates, and, your costs are going to vary depending on, certain specifics or how much time you put into it. But you got to remember also that these costs, it's money well spent, of course, but it does add up. Let's say we take 3 separate trips that, we need to conduct an initial investigation. Travel costs in the continental United States for a week-long trip can be estimated, I'd say about $2,700 a trip. And that's not going to do anything else but go up, with the cost of airfare and everything else. If a company serving, FTE serving as an investigator, let's say he's paid at a daily rate of maybe $700 or maybe $1,000, including benefits, undertakes these trips. That's 3 days' salary. That's $2,100 on top of that. So do the math on a full week, and you decide how long he's going to, he or she is going to be spending on this case. So you can estimate total initial investigation costs at approximately 10 grand or a little bit more. You've got time after that documenting the cargo theft. Anybody that's been in law enforcement, you have to do reports after that. So now there's the desk time. After you come back with all your notes, you're compiling them. Then you're liaising with law enforcement. If they catch somebody, you're going to have to go to court. Okay, court's not going to be local. I can almost guarantee you that. So let's say base that on 80 hours worth of time. Same daily rate. And, so we're looking at about $7,000 in a week, for that also. So estimate the investigational cost for a full truckload theft initially at about $17,000.
So it adds up quickly. Next slide, please. So after you've done all that, now you've got the other side of your business requirements. What's the impact of your insurance cost to your company going to be? One of the first things to consider is, what the impact of your insurance deductibles are, because those are bottom line dollars to operating units within a company. So your deductibles may go up for this following this event. So next time it happens, if you had $100,000 or a $200,000 deductible, you now may have a $250,000 or $300,000 deductible. And so you got to really remember that the insurance companies, they don't make money by paying out on claims. They make money by making people increase their fees and increasing those deductibles. Well, they don't make money on deductibles, but they don't lose any money on it. But you're paying that deductible. You're eating that cost internally. Even if your companies, and I know several people in the pharmaceutical industry are self-insured, but there is still a very large cost to being self-insured. Beyond the fact that you may be, having to account for the entire cost of the load, you're still paying underwriters, and you have to interact in things. Your premiums may increase. Insurance company may cancel your insurance, and they say, okay, we paid this, but just sort of like your auto insurance. They don't like paying out. When they make them pay out too often, they'll drop their insurance on you fairly quickly. Then you go ahead.
Well-known case, that we've heard through the PCSC, without using names of the company, is 3 tractor trailers worth of product stolen. The CEO or CSO, the chief security officer, had to fly to London and meet with the board of directors of Lloyd's of London and explain to them what he was going to do to mitigate this. They had to put a plan in place. And sometimes the plan that you put in place, demanded by the insurance company, may at certain times look like it's overkill, but you're stuck with that cost for the rest of the life of your program.
Right. So that adds to your cost. The replacement insurance can get even more costly because they know you have to have it, so they can sort of set the rates. And just as Ed was alluding to, your future operations could also be impacted because you're not only increasing your insurance cost, your insurance underwriters may require you to do additional programs and added security requirements.
And they won't accept anything less in most cases.
Next slide, please. So even after the incident is done and you've accounted for everything and your insurance is paid out, there's still some incident costs that people don't generally think about. So, you know, you have the cost, and we sort of alluded to this a little bit, cost of managing a recovered product. Your suppliers are going to have very limited liability, so what do you do with that? But you know, probably the biggest impact here is the impact of to the patient. You know, a patient, if they have a loss of confidence, and because you couldn't fill their product, or they know that you're having problems with cargo theft, they may go to a competitor's product. And you know, it's a fairly well-known fact that once people switch, you know, they stay loyal to the brand that's working for them. So they don't tend to come back to the product they were on before if their doctor has shifted them to a comparable product.
And that's not just limited to the product that was stolen and that they were shorted. They may go to that competitor for other things also, some of the bigger ticket items.
And then last, and again, we at least alluded to this at the end of the cost of the investigation, but you may have court and legal costs to associated with this, because if you get called into court to testify in the case of cargo theft, even if it's just as an expert witness on what you were doing and how you do it, that's time, and again, and travel cost and time, all of that is added cost. All right, next slide, please. Okay, these are just some very broad general things. So you have to wonder, what is the impact to your investors and your stock price? Now, generally speaking, a single cargo theft probably is not going to impact your stock price. But if it's large enough and if it's newsworthy enough, it might. And those are the kinds of things that you got to worry. What do your company's investors start to worry about you? And is there a bigger impact to your loss? Very difficult to make a direct correlation, but there is enough evidence that shows that companies, when they have a large number of thefts or a large theft, that their investors start asking questions. And when investors ask questions, they start.
Now, if you're worried about your supply chain security program not getting the attention of the people up top, this will get their attention. And that's not a good thing when it takes this to get their attention. And we share this one case only because our friends at Eli Lilly, Susan Griggs, worked with us on this paper, and it was they were willing to let us share this information. Plus, it was nationally known. This hit the news pretty well. But there was a large warehouse theft in 2010 where nearly $80 million of material was stolen at one time. This instantly put and that it's still to this date is the largest single cargo theft ever in the world. It really did draw an awful lot of attention. Not the good kind of attention like you get when you win the medals at the Olympics. This is the kind of attention you get that you don't want, because this did have some effect on their stock price. And that's why we put this example here. But I would tell you, in addition to, you know, immediately mitigating the potential impact to their operations and permits, there was a enormous investment of time and resources trying to make sense of what happened, answering to regulatory agencies, dealing with the media, and dealing with investors and the stock market, you know, pundits and everybody else. And frankly, you know, it's a little unnerving because Eli Lilly in this case actually was the victim. You know, it's not like they did something wrong, you know, and that would be true for all of us. We have a cargo theft. We didn't do anything wrong, but it's still incumbent upon us to answer all the questions and do all the work to try and prevent it, keep it from happening again. But in the public's eye, we're going to be looked at as negligent if we don't protect the product and allow that to happen.
And the FDA requires us to do that same level of due diligence.
Right.
I don't know that they hold us accountable. Well, they do hold us accountable. I don't think that they think of us as being responsible for the theft, but they do hold us accountable to try and keep it from happening again.
Sure.
All right, next slide, please. This is just a quick printout going along with the paper that was published, and this paper and this worksheet are listed on the Rx-360 website. But we came up with a worksheet to help people sort of start to value how much money or what the weighted value of all of the issues. So this is, you can see many of the factors that we talked about as we went through the slides. And we sit there and we didn't assign a value or a score. You know, some things you can put a hard dollar value to. Boom, you lost this much product and it cost you this much money to you know, that's the price tag on it, if you will. But then, you know, some things we looked at as saying it weighs heavier than others. Now, the worksheet is set up so you can adjust the values to however you want it to be, or you can use a scoring system of 1 to 5, or you can do it any way you would like to. And you have to build it relative to what your company values. And then you can then weight certain items heavier than others, and that's just a multiplication factor. There's nothing fancy about what we did here. It was just to give people a tool to use and how to possibly value this and then compare it internally to your own systems, what your cost may be. Okay, next slide. So I would tell you that while this project was focusing on the cost of total product loss and investigation, it's very important to emphasize that protecting the product, ensuring an aggressive and thorough product program is still always in the interest of patient safety. We don't want to underlie that factor. Everything that we do as a pharmaceutical company and security people within the pharmaceutical industry and the logistics security programs is to protect the product, thereby protecting the patient. And it's important that we do that. And with that, I think we'd go to the next slide and we would open up for questions. Since we're doing this way, please forward your questions to either Ed or to Brittany, and we'll make sure that you get an answer back.
That's correct. I'd like to thank everybody for listening.